proposition has conceded that the world is hungry for energy. In the world, billions of people are entering the energy market, needing energy to clothe themselves, feed themselves, and wash themselves. This is essential to their quality of life. And we look at most developing countries, where most people enter the market, and most rich countries, and we see that although they invest in renewables because in the long term, the longest term, they are important, today they're building coal plants. Today they're building nuclear plants. Because renewables are not an alternative yet. In my instructions, I'll explain why renewables aren't an alternative yet, and why that point actually falls on our side. But first, some rebuttal. Firstly, to the idea of active harm, to which I have two responses. This is an argument against bad mining practices, not nuclear energy. They give one example of a country, China, which mistreats its workers in almost every industry and has bad practices in almost every industry. The US also provides lots of uranium ore, and very little to no deaths are reported there because they simply have better working conditions. We, as the opposition, of course, stand for good working conditions. The same goes for the idea of tremors. The tremors are also used for coal mining in the US, and last year the Democrats introduced a bill to ban it because they thought it was a bad mining practice. This is not essentially an argument against nuclear energy. Alright, then we confronted them with Germany, one of the richest countries in the world, which is choosing for coal when they abandon their nuclear plants. They have conceded that coal is bad. So if we can prove that in a significant amount of the cases, countries will choose for coal over renewables, we take this debate. So, firstly, their whole response has been, well, we don't agree that they switch to coal. This is the reality you have to deal with. These countries currently have three options: nuclear, fossil fuel, and renewables. You're taking nuclear away. That means, we say, that most countries will now choose for fossil fuels. This is simply because fossil fuels are a lot cheaper, and they're the standard in almost every industry in the world. So it's really hard to adopt fossil fuels. Then you said, well, it's just Germany, it's an isolated incident. France is building more nuclear plants. China is building more nuclear plants, United States, India, Brazil, and even in our small country, the Netherlands, people are busy building new reactors. This is a choice people are making all over the world. The examples that at least to use nuclear energy instead of renewable. They've pitted two examples against us. Firstly, the rich oil state of Abu Dhabi, which yes, can afford some solar panels. We do not think Abu Dhabi is representative for most of the world. Secondly, they talk about how Nigeria couldn't afford a power plant. We can see that one of the most deeply corrupt countries in the world, which is almost unique in its corruptness, could not finish one power plant. That does not mean that the whole of the world, in most countries, they can't finish power plants. Please sit down. Alright, then moving on to the idea of the international community. Firstly, rich countries. They said, well, Merkel closed nuclear facilities because she knew they were bad. Actually, Merkel closed it because she was facing an election, and nuclear energy is deeply unpopular in Germany for the reason Jonas talked about, namely that nuclear energy is perceived as dangerous while it actually isn't. So the Germany example obviously falls on our side. And as I just pointed out, France, China, US, India, Brazil, lots of developing and rich countries are choosing for nuclear energy because it is a great option. Then they said, well, but Germany's also doing some investments in renewables. I'll get to that in my constructive argumentation. And then the developing countries. Their argument, the first argument was, well, China has some solar panels. Well, we convincingly told you that China on a grand scale is building most nuclear power plants all over the world because for the whole country, China has recognized that next to its renewable efforts, they need the atom to provide their people with the energy they need to live every day. That's why China is doing this. Secondly, they talked about needing skilled labor. What we see is that building the new nuclear plant is the hardest. This is often done by Western companies with lots of expertise. This is not a problem for developing countries. The staff required to maintain the facilities are only a few dozen and don't need to be rocket scientists. Point 7. The lastly, is it too expensive? battery that small villages can buy, don't have to maintain, and works for 20 years providing energy to a few hundred people without any effort. This is one of the cheapest solutions for energy in the world. Okay, so now to my constructor. While renewables are not able to take over, which obviously clashes with a lot of their material. Okay, firstly, where does this point fall? Firstly, we say that we have lots of incentives for renewables already, monetary and political. If you today invent the renewable energy of the future, you become extremely rich. There is almost no better incentive possible for renewable energies in the world. So people are already trying. Secondly, within the political discourse, nations recognize that in the long term we will have to switch. So governments are often investing in renewable energies. We like renewable energies. When they are available, we will use them. If we can use them now, like in Germany, we will use them complementary to nuclear power. What we're saying is that you cannot only use renewables, and that's why that point falls on our side. So lastly, why renewables are inherently inefficient. And that's for two reasons after this point of information.
We're saying that they can't be used complementary simply because of the amount of pollution that the building of nuclear energy produces completely defeats the purpose of us trying to defeat climate change in the first place.
No, because we are investing in renewable energies. In our world, they are getting more efficient, and in the long term, we will switch over and defeat climate change, but we're not going to let billions of people starve because of lack of energy, because we're not willing to give them energy from nuclear energy. Okay, so two reasons why it's inherently inefficient. Firstly, we use oil all over the world. Why would we go so deep, dig into the ground, and have to get lots of stuff, if we have the sun, water, all things that are available? This is because hard fuels have a higher density of energy per unit. They are extremely, extremely efficient in providing the energy we need for our daily lives. We see that a ray of sunlight, some falling water, has less energy for the amount of effort we put into it to get out of it. So that's why nuclear energy is so very efficient. And secondly, the use of renewables is often very inefficient. The first law of thermodynamics is that when forms of energy are converted, energy is lost. What happens in most solar power plants is that first the rays are collected, which costs energy. Then they are transmitted to a bath, which costs energy. Then the bath needs to be boiled, which costs energy. And lastly, the steam is used to rotate a rotator, which actually delivers the electricity we want. We see that the current methods of renewables always use multiple stages of transformation for energy, which is why they're inherently inefficient instead of simply burning them like we can do with uranium. So in this point, I have proven why renewables are less efficient, and this point falls on our side, and therefore we take this debate.